3 members walked out and formed Foghat, who sold 10 million records while the man they left behind started over. Nearly 60 musicians passed through Savoy Brown across 57 years. Bill Bruford, Paul Raymond, Dave Walker, all trained here, all left for bigger things. Their most famous album ended so abruptly that fans thought their records were broken, and their leader reached #1, 52 years after he started. This is the rise and fall of Savoy Brown. London, 1965. The city was on fire. Not the kind of fire that burned buildings, but the kind that burned inside young men who had just discovered American blues records and felt something shift in their souls the moment the needle dropped. Muddy Waters, Howlin' Wolf, Willie Dixon. These sounds had crossed the Atlantic from the Mississippi Delta, and in the grimy clubs and basement venues of the British capital, a generation of musicians was trying to figure out how to play them. This was the British blues boom, one of the most fertile and furious creative periods in rock history. From those years came Cream, Fleetwood Mac, Led Zeppelin, the Rolling Stones. But in 1965, none of them had broken through yet. They were all still down in the trenches together, sweating it out on the same stages, competing for the same club bookings. And in that crowd was a young Welsh guitarist named Kim Simmons. Before we continue, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Simmons was different from the start. While many of his peers approached the blues as a fashion, a ticket out of obscurity, Simmons was a true believer. His older brother Harry had exposed him to gospel, blues, and jazz from the time he was a child, filling the house with sounds that most English teenagers never heard. By the time he was 13 years old, Simmons had heard Muddy Waters for the first time, and something clicked into place that would never come undone. He didn't just want to play the blues, he wanted to live inside it. In 1965, Simmons co-founded the Savoy Brown Blues Band. The name itself was a declaration of intent, borrowed from the prestigious American jazz label Savoy Records, then paired with the plain surname Brown, elegant and unpretentious at the same time. No gimmicks, no image, just the music. The early lineup was notable not only for its sound, but for its social significance. Vocalist Bryce Porteous was one of the first black singers to front a British rock band, providing an authentic, soulful presence that complemented Simmons' burgeoning lead guitar work. Together, the band established their own blues club and played there as the house band every Wednesday for months in 1966, night after night, sharpening their improvisational instincts, developing a chemistry that couldn't be bought or faked. They shared stages with future legends. In August 1966, they opened for Cream. In June 1967, they backed the great John Lee Hooker on his UK tour. These were not small moments. They were confirmation that Savoy Brown belonged in serious company, even if the world hadn't recognized it yet. Their 1967 debut album, Shakedown, was a collection of blues covers that demonstrated their deep mastery of the form. But even in those earliest days, the revolving door had already begun to turn. Co-founder John O'Leary departed following an internal dispute, setting a pattern that would define the next 5 decades. Simmons was left standing, as he always would be, holding the music together with his bare hands. The United Kingdom never quite figured out what to do with Savoy Brown. They were too raw for the pop charts, too blues-heavy for the singles market. Britain wanted hits. Savoy Brown had something else. They had truth.
Train I ride goes to God knows where.
But across the Atlantic, something extraordinary was changing. FM radio was reshaping the entire landscape of American rock. Where AM stations played tight 3-minute singles engineered for commercial rotation, FM programmers had the freedom to play whatever they believed in. Long jams, deep cuts, extended blues workouts that could stretch to 20 minutes and carry listeners somewhere they had never been. Album-oriented rock was being born, and it needed a soundtrack. Savoy Brown was made for that radio. In 1969, the band began to break into the American market, and the response was immediate. Legendary DJs spun tracks like Train to Nowhere and I'm Tired into the late-night hours, reaching suburban teenagers across the country who were hungry for music that felt honest. Music that didn't sound assembled by committee in a record label boardroom. Detroit, in particular, became their stronghold. Simmons later said that Detroit had been their #1 city for fan support since their very first American tour. And that meant everything. Detroit was a city built on labor, discipline, and uncompromising standards. The people who worked the factories by day and filled the clubs by night had no patience for pretension. Savoy Brown fit right in. The albums came quickly during this period. Blue Matter arrived in 1969. A Step Further followed that same year, climbing to number 71 on the Billboard charts. The record featured a 22-minute live medley called Savoy Brown Boogie, a sidelong monster that wove together rock and roll standards, blues riffs, and improvisational passages that had no ceiling. For audiences in those theaters and arenas, it wasn't just a concert. It was an experience that changed how they understood what music could do. Chris Yulden fronted the band during this period, a powerhouse vocalist with a theatrical flair and a voice that brought sophistication and swagger to the Savoy Brown sound. The 1970 album, Raw Sienna, captured the band at the height of this first wave of American success. Critics noticed, fans showed up, the future felt wide open. But success in the music industry rarely arrives without shadows gathering at the edges. By 1971, Savoy Brown had entered the most creative and commercially powerful period of their entire career. And the centerpiece of that peak, the album that would define them forever, was already taking shape in a recording studio in London. Following the departure of vocalist Chris Yulden in May 1970, Simmons reconfigured the band as a lean, focused four-piece. The new lineup featured Simmons on guitar, Dave Peverett on vocals and rhythm guitar, Roger Earl on drums, and Tony Stevens on bass. Together they recorded Looking In, which climbed to number 39 on the Billboard 200, the best chart position the band had ever achieved. The sound had shifted. It was heavier now, more direct. The jazz inflections that had colored the earlier records had given way to a raw, muscular boogie that felt physically unstoppable. The kind of music that didn't ask permission. Then came 1972. Then came Hellbound Train. The album was recorded in London with a production approach that emphasized live energy and atmosphere. It gave the recording a sense of physical space that most studio albums of the era never approached. You could feel the room. The title track itself was a 9-minute exercise in slow-building cinematic tension. Co-written by Simmons and Dave Peverett, the song began with a quiet, almost patient menace, and grew in intensity across its full length until it reached a frantic, overwhelming climax. And then, and this detail stunned listeners across America, it stopped, abruptly, without resolution. The needle reached the runoff groove with the music still raging in full fury. Many fans thought their records were defective. They called the store. They inspected the grooves. They played it again. It wasn't defective. It was a deliberate artistic decision, one of the boldest of the era. The abrupt ending created a sense of dramatic finality that was genuinely unsettling, the kind of choice that lingered in the mind long after the needle lifted. Hellbound Train reached number 34 on the Billboard charts. It was a fixture on FM radio across the country. The band was headlining venues, sharing stages with the biggest names in rock, and connecting with hundreds of thousands of American fans who had made Savoy Brown part of the fabric of their lives. For one brief, powerful moment, everything was exactly where it was supposed to be, but that moment was already slipping away. It arrived without ceremony, the way the worst losses always do. In 1971, between the Looking In tour and what should have been the band's next push toward the summit, 3 of Savoy Brown's most essential members made a decision together. Dave Peverett, Roger Earl, and Tony Stevens walked out as a group. They weren't just leaving the band, they were taking its momentum with them. They went on to form Foghat. For Kim Simmons, the departure was a devastating blow. Not just personally, but structurally. These weren't interchangeable musicians. Peverett was a co-writer, a charismatic live presence, a man who had absorbed the Savoy Brown approach and helped shape it into something radio-ready. Earl was one of the most reliable, powerful drummers in the British blues world. Stevens anchored the low end with a fluency that took years to develop. And they were gone, all 3 of them at once. The official accounts varied. Simmons later suggested the split was partly his own doing, that he had pushed the band toward a new musical direction and the others resisted. But the members who left told a different story. They wanted artistic freedom, a more commercial rock sound, and perhaps most simply, the chance to be the ones making the decisions. In the music industry, that impulse is always understandable. It is rarely painless. The irony was almost too much to absorb. The musicians who had spent years inside what writers would later call the University of Blues Rock walked out the door and built a platinum career. Foghat sold 10 million records. They played sold-out arenas. Slow Ride became one of the defining anthems of the decade, and Kim Simmons started over. The list of musicians who passed through Savoy Brown reads like an index of rock history. Bill Bruford, who went on to anchor Yes and King Crimson, spent time with the band in 1968, and Simmons reportedly nearly dismissed him for not playing the shuffle correctly. Paul Raymond, who later became a cornerstone of UFO, contributed to the Savoy Brown story in later years. Dave Walker, who sang on that same era of the band, later played with Fleetwood Mac and Black Sabbath. Nearly 60 musicians cycled through Savoy Brown over the decades. Every departure meant another reset, another round of auditions and rehearsals, another attempt to rebuild from scratch the kind of chemistry that had taken years to grow in the first place. And every reset cost them time, the one resource the music industry never gave back. Simmons later admitted that his own uncompromising vision was often at the center of the turnover. He could hear what he wanted clearly in his mind, and if a musician couldn't deliver it, they were replaced. It was the only way he knew how to protect the music he had dedicated his life to. But precision is expensive, and patience has limits. By the mid-1970s, the commercial window that had given Savoy Brown their peak years was closing fast. Punk rock was dismantling everything the blues rock generation had built, deliberately and with contempt. Disco was consuming the American mainstream. FM radio was tightening its playlists, replacing the free-form programming that had launched the band's reputation with a narrower, more commercially calculated format. The boogie that Simmons had spent a decade perfecting was no longer what the industry wanted to hear. He played it anyway. Lesser men would have quit. Most of them did. Many of Simmons' contemporaries from the British blues boom had by the late 1970s retired quietly to the English countryside, accepted production deals, or simply acknowledged that their moment in the cultural conversation had passed. It was a dignified retreat that most people in the industry understood and respected. The music had moved on. Why fight it? Simmons never saw it that way. He relocated his base of operations to the United States, eventually settling in central New York in the mid-1990s. Far from the commercial centers of the music industry, far from the nostalgia circuit that claimed so many of his peers, he quietly built something that had its own kind of integrity. The blues scene in central New York became, in part, his creation. A community of musicians who took the music seriously, who rehearsed hard and performed with commitment, and who regarded Kim Simmons not as a relic but as their leader. He recruited local players who understood the groove he was chasing. Drummer Garnett Grimm and bassist Pat DeSalvo became one of the longest-running consistent lineups in the band's entire 57-year history. A remarkable distinction, given the revolving door that had defined everything that came before. Together, they played smaller venues and dedicated blues festivals, building the kind of audience that doesn't follow trends. They were there for the music and nothing else. Simmons described the logistics of perpetual touring in later years as real drudgery. The loading and the driving, the overnight miles, the parade of identical hotel rooms in cities that blurred together after a while. But the moment he stepped onto the stage, he said, all of that disappeared. The music returned. It had always been the point, and it never stopped being the point. In his final years, Simmons found a second creative language in visual art. He painted abstract portraits of blues legends and composed monochrome works that shared the same emotional vocabulary as his guitar playing. Spontaneous, intuitive, driven by feeling rather than formula. He described painting in exactly the same terms he used to describe soloing: spontaneous problem solving, emotional improvisation, finding the answer in the moment rather than planning it in advance. His watercolors became mementos for fans, tangible pieces of a 50-year journey they could carry home and put on their walls. and the music never stopped coming. In 2017, Simmons released an album that climbed to #1 on the Billboard Blues chart, 52 years after founding the band. It was not nostalgia. It was proof that the vision had never dimmed and that the market for authentic blues rock had never truly disappeared. It had just been waiting for someone willing to stay the course long enough to find it again. Kim Simmons passed away on December the 13th, 2022, just days after his 75th birthday. The tributes arrived quickly, and from every corner of the music world. Joe Bonamassa, one of the most respected blues guitarists working today, called Simmons one of the founding fathers of the British blues boom and one of the kindest souls the industry had produced. Blues musicians around the world paused to acknowledge a debt that had rarely been spoken aloud during his lifetime.
I'm tired of being a fool.
The technical legacy of Savoy Brown is woven into the fabric of rock music in ways rarely acknowledged. Simmons was an early adopter of orange amplifiers in the blues rock scene, helping keep their distinct sound visible to American audiences. His devoted use of the Gibson Flying V, a commercial failure when first released in 1958, helped keep the instrument visible as a blues rock stage staple that later guitarists would make their defining signature. And then there is the music itself. The albums Savoy Brown recorded between 1968 and 1972 have been rediscovered by vinyl collectors and blues enthusiasts who recognize them as some of the most authentic and powerful recordings of the entire era, not polished, not engineered for radio formats or demographic studies. They were recorded by people who meant every single note, and that truth is audible across 5 decades. This is the final and perhaps most redemptive irony of the Savoy Brown story. While the band never became household names in the way that Foghat or Fleetwood Mac did, their music outlasted the commercial trends that eventually buried many of their contemporaries. The boogie they built in those London clubs, refined on those American highways, and carried through 57 years of lineup changes and shifting musical fashions is still alive. It still moves people who encounter it for the first time, who have no nostalgia for the era, but simply respond to the truth of the playing. Simmons once said he had modeled his entire career after Muddy Waters and John Lee Hooker, men who played until their bodies would not allow them to continue. Men who understood that the music was the point and the fame surrounding it was merely weather. He kept that faith without wavering across his entire professional life. The musicians who left Savoy Brown went on to fill arenas. They sold millions of records. They became legends whose names are known by people who never saw them perform. Kim Simmons stayed. He stayed and rebuilt and played and rebuilt again. And in doing so, he demonstrated something that the music industry almost never rewards, but that genuine fans always recognize. There is a form of greatness that has nothing to do with chart positions or sold-out shows. It has to do with showing up every night for 57 years because the music demanded it. Savoy Brown never became household named, but for those who lived through the blues rock era, who heard Hellbound Train on a car radio on a summer night, they were something better than famous. They were real. Kim Simmons gave 57 years to a band the industry never fully understood. The architects of the boogie, the band nobody could keep together. What's your memory of Savoy Brown? Drop it in the comments and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories from rock's greatest era.